nor were colored officers admitted to any of the 14 camps. The next best thing seemed to be a separate camp, after much wrangling, a camp was set up for colored officers at Fort Des Moines, Iowa. There was a lot of debate going on at that time. There were a large segment of the black community that said, well, why are we fighting and wrangling to go save somebody else for democracy and we don't have it here?
Amen.
There was another group who felt differently. And it was quite a battle going on in this country. Well, it was similar to WB and Booker T. There's a play been done about that. But W.B. Du Bois finally said, let's do it. He was able to settle the question. Quoting from this book, this is the quote: colored men were fighting with the government in order to wring from it mission to fight for it. And in a very literal sense, it may be said that our American soldiers of the Negro race went over to France to fight for the liberation of oppressed people of Europe. It was a marvelous thing to have occurred that a race itself so long oppressed should have the opportunity to help save others from oppression. The next person I want to talk about is Wayne Minor. Many of you are familiar with Wayne Minor. This is the poster. And I've been doing this for so long, and I'm not in the Stone Age. I've been offered even the library, and said I can do this on a PowerPoint, but I want to learn how to do this myself, and I'm going to learn it next month. So again, thank you, Ann. So the next time you do this, we'll have a PowerPoint. Now, I do computers, so I'm not one of those old persons who say, I don't want to be bothered with it. I do bother with the computer. But this is remembering Wayne Minor. Some of you may have read in the paper on Sunday, there is a play, I need this, okay, on Off-Broadway Theater about Wayne Minor. I think it's starting this week. So who is Wayne Minor? He was born he enlisted in the Army in Kansas City on October 16, 1917. He completed his training at Camp Dodge in Iowa. Well, I'm talking about Camp Dodge. One of my heroes, the person outside of my family that was closest to me was H.W. Thorne, who was the founder of Douglas State Bank. Mr. Thorne was in Texas, was drafted, and he didn't refuse to go because they put you in jail, but he did go to Fort Dodge, Iowa. I was the executive of his state, and on the back of his discharge, and he used to talk about this all the time, he stated to them that if I can't have freedom in this country, I'm not going to go fight. So he went on to Fort Dodge, Iowa to keep from going to prison. That's on the back of his discharge, and he received a general discharge. There is another person, I'm not going to call the name, who lived in Arkansas, who refused to go, and he was sent to Leavenworth. After being discharged, he opened a shoe shop on Fifth Street. And I used to go and talk to him. That's where I had my shoes fixed, because he was the cheapest in town. And he had a heavy Jewish accent, interesting. He would study the Bible, and children, and we'll be talking about them, hopefully talk about some in high school, have achieved stuff that's unbelievable. I'm not going to call his name. Some of you may know who I'm talking about. Shoe shop was sit right on Fifth Street, right there by Jersey Creek. Next person I want to talk about is William H. Clark. On the same poster. Many of you may have known Mr. Clark and may have known his family, but I knew him personally. Spent a lot of time with him. He moved around in the community quite a bit, very active in the Northeast Business Association. He lived on North 7th Street. His wife had a business called Clark Ceramics. They were very active in the Northeast Business Association. Matter of fact, Mr. Clark one year was president of the Northeast Business Association. He was one of the few veterans that I've found, even during the Korean and the Vietnam War, that would openly talk about their experiences. That's always very interesting. A lot of them don't like to talk about, particularly from the First World War and the Second World War. Many of them don't like to talk about the experience because in many instances, some of which we've cited, was probably too painful. He was born May 19, 1891 in Lexington, Mississippi. He attended Tuskegee Institute of Alabama, and all of his fees was paid by the landowner where he lived. You all draw your own conclusion. He graduated in 1909. One of his majors was architecture. The biography and picture that you see was given to me by his daughter, Shirley Ann Clark Perry. And I think she's next to the youngest. Some of you may have gone to school with some of the Clarks. Maybe you all are too young or too old, I'm not sure. All of the members of the family graduated from Sumner High School, and they were all very talented. The next to the oldest daughter was Betty Robinson. They were very active in the church out on Parallel. But Betty was worked for the federal government and was for a number of years as president of Blackstone government, also known as BIG. Some of you may remember Betty through that. Lieutenant Clark described the battle in which Wayne Minor was killed. So if the people doing the play don't know what happened, we have the story. He visited the Call newspaper often, and in his own words, here's what he stated. In going to the Call office, and Miss Ross interviewed him. He said, 45 years ago, November 11th, 1918, the All-Negro Division, 30,000 strong, was attacking the village of Caney, 11 miles southwest of the highly fortified city of Metz, Germany. I was commanding the foremost advancing units of Company A of the 366th Infantry. Wayne Minor was a private in the 1st platoon. I commanded the 1st and 4th platoon, 124 men strong. We were spearheading the regiment position of the entire Allied line. To the east of us was the Vosges Mountains and a network of rivers that in all the wars between the Germany Army and France, no army had ever attempted to cross these mountains. 5 hours before jumping off time, I received my battle orders from Captain George Holland, our company commander. Second Lieutenant William Jones was my second in command, leader of the 4th platoon. We were on the high ground of the village of Mont Fabian, overlooking the Bois Vivarotti. Our first objective, about 1 mile away, was known to be occupied by German outpost units. On our left were units of Company F, led by First Lieutenant Mallow W. Rush, and his left was First Lieutenant Oscar Brown, commanding the 351st Machine Gun Company, supporting both of us. 1/2 hour before jumping off time, Lieutenant Brown sent through an appeal relating to our company for 4 men to assist in carrying machine gun ammunition. This was an unwanted assignment, and I called for volunteers. I made a strong appeal, but for a minute or two, no one stepped forward to accept. I told our boys, "You're letting me down." And I would use a lottery system. As I was about to execute that method of selection, Private Wayne Minor stepped forward as the first volunteer. Then another, until the 4 had responded. When Wayne Minor stepped out, a lump-like feeling accumulated in my throat. He was highly cultured and a courageous soldier, respected by the entire company of 250 men. I had used him on every patrol I had made, including the one on October 16th of the same year, when members of the patrol were so pleasing to division headquarters that Brigadier General Barnum came to the company and assembled the 7 of us who carried out praised us highly and had our company clerk to type out a personal eulogy that he gladly signed. It was my most prized possession until I lost it going through a losing plant. An ammunition carrier slings his rifle. His main defense across his back, it becomes a pack horse. The terrain was such a rough nature that Lieutenant Brown had to use this method, as mules and ammunition vehicles could not be used. I never saw Wayne Minor again. From my hospital bed at Tours, France, where I had been carried after we occupied our first objective, I learned that he had been killed by bursting shrapnel. I recommended him for the Distinguished Service Cross. Somehow, my captain, through who it was seen, never received it. It was lost, as somebody mentioned tonight. A lot of those got lost. And a brave and sacrificing and deserving soldier did not receive his just reward, even posthumously. We went over the top of the schedule at 5:09. If you notice, he had a particular time. If you knew Mr. Clark, you would understand, because he was a very particular man, very detailed person. Advancing at a brisk walk, 10 paces apart, the artillery from the enemy was intense. Focal planes of the German army dominated the skies at the beginning and pinpointed our advance. Singing shrapnel passed within a few feet of me and cut down a corporal. His last words were, "Oh Lord, Lieutenant, they got me." Our signers told us to help him until the hospital corps arrived, and were told that he died before other help reached him. Our objective, the Bois Outreau, could not be achieved as Lieutenant Rush advanced 3 minutes ahead of us, with the woods seemingly offering cover. We were pushed east into the open. This proved to be a godsend for my company. The Germans cut loose on the woods with the most thundering artillery barrage we had ever heard. Lieutenant Rush was mortally wounded. He wandered into our position and fell. His stature of being the tallest officer of our regiment was his undoing, as shrapnel cut straight through the middle of his head. Mustard gas from exploding shells was so intense, it was dripping from bushes. The machine gun fire had whipped the weeds as naked as straws. And we had been a little later digging into our losses would have been much heavier. As it was, our casualties were above 40%. Company A was even higher. In November 1966, fast forward, Lieutenant Clark visited the Kansas City, office of the Kansas City Call newspaper and talked to Miss Marie Ross again. He said he had just received a package from the U.S. government while he was in the VA hospital. It was his Silver Star, 48 years later. He recalled the story, but also stated at the end, he heard the bugle sounded, ending the war. He stated that he lapsed into unconsciousness and was carried off the battlefield to a hospital in Tours, France. Shrapnel had cut my legs. Gas had swollen my tongue so bad I could only close my mouth with difficulty, and my eyes had popped out of my sockets. The next unit I'd like to talk about is 805th Pioneer Infantry. One of them is still over on the table over there.
Okay.
This book was given to me by my late friend William Jerome Strickland about 10 years ago. When he gave it to me, he said, "You know, I'm going back to Chicago. I don't know what I'll ever do with this book. I've been carrying it around, but you can have it." I put it on the shelf, and I really did not look at it until about 5 years ago. About 3 years ago, really. I opened the book, and I flipped it open. Just flipped it open. And the page that it turned to, I glanced at the names And lo and behold, I saw my great uncle's name, Charles Liddell. Family name as we call Uncle Charlie. One of the other names that I saw and recognized was Ross Sykes, who lived at 946 New Jersey. Another name that I recognized, I knew Mr. Sykes very well. The other name that I recognized was J.J. Neely, who was a teacher and principal of Douglas Elementary School and a very active member of the Kansas City branch of NAACP in the 1920s. 59 members of headquarters company was from Kansas City, Kansas, complete with their home addresses. I was able to identify Uncle Charlie in a small picture. There was a small picture of part of the headquarters company. And I was able to identify Uncle Charlie in that picture. The vast majority of the officers of the regiment was white. All of the soldiers were African Americans. In the history, there is little mention of the black soldiers, but the book has pictures, names, and addresses of all of the companies in this regiment. The pictures are stunning. To look at this book, it has some amazing, amazing pictures. It doesn't describe in the battles, but amazing pictures. They were deployed to France and were involved in the battles at Argonne Forest. The regiment had a total of 2,810 men. There were 459 from Kansas and 918 from Missouri. This unit also, they point out in the book, each regiment or each company, they give the names and the address of everybody. They had what they called the medical units. These were the persons who were, all of them not doctors, but the medical units. This is taken from the book. Of the states represented,